Jack and I decided that I need a Jack quilt. I don't know how to make a quilt, but we are going to try. Jack is going to help. And I got my Sally and Jack panel. I've already stitched it down to some batting, although it's not very puffy, so it didn't end up very 3D, but it gives it a nice white background to make the colors crisp. And I have a bunch of Jack and Sally fabric, and I have an IKEA blanket. And we're just going to try to mash them together and see how it works without any instructions. This is me getting ready to center my panel, and I trimmed down the excess batting, which it's not as puffy as I had originally hoped it would be, but I didn't want to use a bunch of polyfill, and I didn't want to spend the money on cotton to really make it as poofy. I had just gotten some scrap cotton blend padding from Fab Cycle that I used, and I probably should have used more layers if I wanted it puffier, but it does make the colors nice, like it, because Jack's face is kind of see-through, so on the gray blanket he does look more like whitish gray, and the white batting does make him stand out like whiter, and it makes all the lighter colors brighter, so they're not dulled down by the gray blanket. So in the end I am happy with it, but it could have been like more poofy 3D. But what I'm doing is I'm just trimming off that excess batting that I had stitched down, and I didn't square up this panel, which is part of the reason why it goes on crooked. Plus, I don't measure anything here. I'm just trimming my panel slightly, and I folded my blanket into quarters, and now I'm folding the panel into quarters, and I'm matching up the center points and then pinning it and sort of unfolding it and pinning it from there. You'll see as it goes on how it doesn't turn out straight, like at all. And partway through this, I had kind of wished I had measured and made it more straight, but actually in the end, I like how not straight it is, how it's like strange and unusual and crooked and kind of messy, because that's really the feeling I wanted to go for anyway. I didn't want something that was perfect, so it really does work with like the look I was going for. But you can see I have 1/4 pinned down, and then I'm just trying to like flatten the blanket and the panel as much as possible so that I don't get any wrinkles underneath it. And like you do get some like shrinking of your blanket with all the quilting that you do of all the different panels, which I didn't account for, but this is just more of a personal movie time cuddle blanket than it is like an actual like bedspread to look nice. So I pin it down, and this is where I will start to try to sew it on. And I was really inspired by like patchwork quilts and crazy quilts. So I had wanted to do this on my treadle Singer machine. And you can see I do start stitching the panel on with it, but the knob to adjust the pressure of the presser foot, I couldn't get to loosen at all. So the presser foot was way too tight for this bulky material, and I struggle trying to loosen it, and it doesn't work at all. So I have to like really push and pull this fabric through the sewing machine, which is what you don't want to do and isn't a good idea, and often breaks needles and generally just turns out a mess. I do use it to finish stitching on this panel, but I do switch to one of my other machines to actually finish it, even though I really had wanted to do it on the treadle sewing machine. And I think the reason I wanted to do it on this machine was because I had always wanted like a loyalist style quilt. Like you learn in school about the loyalists and how they used like the fabrics they had left over from their clothing and their other projects, and they just made like random crazy quilt, like just stitched leftovers down any way they could. It didn't really come up with like designs and patterns per se. It was more like rag quilting, which is really what I was inspired by for what I wanted for those Jack and Sally quilts. Is I wanted like this rag leftover sort of random stitched downness of all the different parts, which I kind of get. But I think if I had actually made some sort of plan before I started, it would have turned out even better. But I really go in with like no plan at all on how I want the different fabrics and colors to meet up. And even though I have like a fair amount of fabric, I don't really have that many different colors. Like the center is very bluish, but I don't really have a lot of like blue fabrics for like the outside pieces that I try to do. So it is a very random project. Although I'm still fighting with my treadle to get my pattern through, unless me watching this is actually slower than what it actually I'm recording at. So I don't know. You might not be seeing me still fighting with the treadle machine as I'm talking now. Who knows? Hopefully this lines up. I'm not very good. I'm just trying to figure this how to do a voiceover out. This might not be working at all. But I guess we'll find out one way or another. Okay, my blanket. So what I did for my squares and my pieces is I just snipped pieces of fabric and just ripped them along the grain lines to get the sizes I wanted. And I had decided I wanted like long strips of the pink Jack and Sally fabric along the edges, because I wasn't, at this point, like I said, I had no plan. So I wasn't really sure how much of which color I was going to use where. I just decided that I wanted pink next to the blue and I wanted the orange and red kind of next to the pink. And I had in mind that I did want to save enough of each of these fabrics to make like a Jack and Sally skirt. And I wasn't really sure of how much I needed or how much I was using for my blanket. So I just took good chunks at first and just kind of pieced them where I wanted them. And you can see I'm not sewing these squares together and then quilting it down to the blanket. I'm kind of just placing squares on top of the panel edge and the blanket, and I'm just folding down the edges and kind of tucking them under and putting different pieces over top of other squares and then putting some pieces underneath pieces of other squares. And I'm just randomly cutting and tearing this fabric apart. And as I'm doing this, I have the thought that anybody who quilts for real is probably like stressed and like just screaming no at the screen as I just rip and tear and pin down chunks of fabric the same way I do when people make bodices out of duct tape. But I'm just like, no, just do it right. What are you doing? And it made me chuckle a lot to think that that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm just like doing it so wrong. And it ends up looking like something a 5-year-old did, although I'm okay with that. I'm okay with having something done completely wrong. And I guess people who make bodices out of duct tape are okay with having something done completely wrong. But yes, I imagine quilters are having the stress and anxiety if they watch this as I do when I watch people do pattern drafting and bodice making all wrong. You know, they're just like, it could have turned out so nice and like looking crisp and clean and like even. But I'm okay with it being messy because, well, I really did want like a rag style quilt, which I guess there is, in fact, better ways to do a rag style quilt. But like the little girl in me in 4th grade that was like learning about loyalists and loyalist days and, you know, Victorian Christmases and stuff like that at school. I had always wanted just like a messy quilt. And this is a messy quilt is exactly what I end up with. And I decided halfway through, because I was getting stressed about how much pink and how much orange to use, I just stopped working on the quilt altogether and I decide to cut out a skirt, which is what I'm doing here. I have the pink laid out and I have a 70s like peasant skirt, cottagecore skirt now, I guess, pattern of like the 3 tiers stacked on top of each other. And because the pattern was a bit smaller than I am, I just extended each panel by, well, I didn't really like have a number that I extended it by. I was like, I'm going to extend it by this much. And that's how much I extended each panel by. Although I do end up shortening the top panel because I do have short legs, and I find some of the longer panels, even if I hem the skirt like where I need for my height, it doesn't hit the same spot in my thighs or in my calves of like where it's supposed to. So I do shorten the very top tier a little. But yeah, I decide that I am cutting out long, very long rectangles to gather down into a tiered skirt, and that I will then use the leftover fabric ripped up into squares and rectangles for the rest of the blanket. And I just decided that I would do the skirt before finishing my blanket, and it gave me way less anxiety about how much pink I was putting where and how much orange. 2 tiers sewn together, and a close-up of how I just folded and stitched the squares together. Now I couldn't get the binding to go on through the sewing machine at all. It turned out really terrible, so I am hand stitching it down, and I'm just sort of slipping through the top and going through the back and catching it. I have a squishmallow on my knee to like raise my project, and I can also use them as a pin cushion as I work through. And it's finished, not perfect. And this is my Jack and Sally quilt, which I really like how messy and random it is now that I have it. And I like the way that it's not exactly centered. And my Jack and Sally skirt is just floofy and cute, and it makes me happy. And I really like it, and I think it's pretty adorable. And it's Jack and Sally meant to be, and all the little random squares. So I'm really happy with how messy and strange it turned